Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Kevin. And yeah, I'm a big fan of the last name. But no, thank you so much for the group for having me on tonight. It is always such a privilege and an honor to be in service to Alcoholics Anonymous. I love this program. It's such a joy to me to get to speak about what this program has done for my life, what it has done for the lives of everybody around me, for my family, for my daughter, for the community as a whole. And I have such a great love for this program, for the fellowship of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I get asked to be in service, it's always a privilege, and it always brings me such happiness. And I didn't always feel that way about Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, for so many years, I came in and out of the rooms of AA. First of all, I didn't know what I was doing there. I thought my problem was alcohol, and if you just separated me from alcohol, I would be fine. So I kept coming in and getting separated and picking back up, and coming in and getting separated and picking back up. I didn't know that sober was my problem. I had no idea what my real problem was. And for so many years, I came in and out of the rooms of AA, and I absolutely love the traditions. And, especially that the only requirement for membership here is an honest desire to stop drinking. And I didn't have that. For the longest time, I had no honest desire to stop drinking. I had an honest desire for consequences to stop happening, but I never had an honest desire to stop drinking because of what alcohol did for me. It relieved me of this, the 100 forms of fear, self-seeking, self-delusion, that prison of me that I had been living in, that prison of my own skin, that I suffered from long before I picked up a drink. And I didn't want to be separated from alcohol. And I never thought I never wanted this solution to my problem to be spiritual in nature. I wanted it to be anything other than God. I wanted it to be a man or money or job or anything out here. I thought I could bring some babies into this world and they would fix me. I just did not want the solution to what was wrong with me to be spiritual in nature. And I sought out all these human powers and all these outside solutions, and none of them worked. Not a single one of them worked. And in the process of doing that, I damaged a lot of people. And, I come in and out of the rooms and I see so many happy, joyous, and free people. And I can't stand you and I hate you. And that's how I show up here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I am so grateful that I experienced a level of brokenness finally, that, this alcohol, this self beat me into a state of reasonableness that opened my eyes and my ears in a new way, so I could finally hear what it was you guys were talking about, that I could finally experience what was going on in this room, in these rooms, and pick up this spiritual kit of tools that you had been lovingly laying at my feet over and over and over and over. I never in a million years thought that I could exist without picking up a drink or putting another substance in my body, because sober was so incredibly painful for me. It had always been painful for me, even long before I picked up a drink. I remember as a child being consumed with fear, being consumed with self, walking around this world, looking at other kids at school, thinking they got a playbook that I didn't get. Like they knew how to do life and I didn't know how to do life. I was afraid of everyone and everything. I was always wanting to connect with something. I've been a seeker my whole life, right? And I've always wanted to be a part of something bigger. I've always wanted to connect with other people. And I felt that connection was so far away from me and so far removed from me that I was never going to be good enough to be, to have friends, even in my own home. My siblings were better than me. I just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere in this world. And I just walk around in this prison like I'm holding my breath. And then something happens to me, and when I'm a teenager, and I experience this trauma at the hands of these three men. And after that happens, after walking around all these years in this prison of me and suffering, really, and then I experience this trauma and it gets that much worse. Like I'm already full of fear and self, but then it turns into rage and disgust and shame, and I'm covered in it, and I can't breathe, and I hate everyone, and frankly, I want to die. And I can't tell you that before that happened, I had never had a drink before, but I will tell you that after I had that experience, I picked up a drink and I experienced the effects produced by alcohol. And And from that moment on, I did not want to be separated from it, because for the first time in my entire life, I didn't care what the world thought of me. I didn't care what people thought of me. I didn't, I felt connected. All that connection that I had been seeking was right there in that moment. Everything fit, my skin fit. I felt like I could breathe. Everything was okay for the first time in my entire life. And I didn't want to kill myself. And in that moment, that was an absolute miracle for someone like me, and I wanted that feeling and that effect all the time. And from the very beginning, I was an abnormal drinker. Our book talks about this phenomenon of craving and this physical allergy. And I believe that I experienced that very early on, because I've never even thought about having one of anything. One drink has never been on my radar. Like, I don't even understand the point. I have a father who enjoys his 25-year-old scotch. He likes to swirl it around. He loves the taste of it. He likes to sip it and enjoy it. I don't get that. I'll drink, Everclear, and I'll hold my nose and get it down, because I don't care what it tastes like. I just need the effect produced. I need that relief. I need that sense of ease and comfort so badly. And in the beginning, that was already there. I was already different from the other kids when they drank. There was no stopping me. I just kept going and I kept going. I didn't have that ability to stop. And, it says in our book that, many of us started out as moderate or hard drinkers. And and then progressed to the real deal. And, I think I might have skipped over that whole moderate thing and gone right to the hard drinker. And the only reason I say that is because our big book is pretty specific in its definitions, and it defines a moderate drinker, and I'm paraphrasing, is someone, if they need to, can stop with little trouble. And that's never been my story. Because the first time I ever needed to stop for any reason was at the age of 19, when I got pregnant with my daughter. And I stopped for the sake of that pregnancy. I stopped not because, I was super worried about the child I was carrying. I stopped because it's a bad look for a pregnant woman to sit on a bar stool, and I'm consumed with what the world thinks of me. So I stopped drinking for these 9 months. But unlike my sisters, who are normal people, who are, when they're pregnant, this is what they're doing. They're, decorating nurseries and picking out baby names. What I do when I'm pregnant is I count the days like I'm in prison, and I, mark them off. And I cannot wait until I can get this kid out of me, so I can pick up a drink and again experience that effect produced by alcohol, so I can breathe again, because it's that painful. And that's exactly what I do. And I pick up that drink, and as soon as she's born, and I'm off to the races again, and I convince myself I'm this good parent, because I basically just am physically there for my child. I keep her from, dying. That's about all I'm doing. And I leave my husband after 10 months, and, I dress up the outside, and I try to show the world that I have it together. But during this time, my disease is progressing, right? Over time, I'm crossing these invisible lines, and I don't realize it's happening, where it's fun and it's a party and I'm really enjoying it. But I'm crossing this line where it's becoming a necessity. Right. And by the time my daughter's 3 years old, my life is becoming unmanageable, and other people are starting to see it. And so my ex-husband steps in, and he takes primary physical custody of our child. And this is what I do on the outside, because this is what I think the world wants to see. I kick and I scream and I fight and I make this big scene. How dare you? I try to run him over in the parking lot of the courthouse, because how dare you take my child from me? She's mine. I gave birth to her. But the truth deep down, the truth that I couldn't speak, and the truth that I may not have even known at that point, because I was so heavy in this delusion, the truth was that I was relieved. I was relieved that I didn't have to wake up with her in the morning, that I didn't have to do these duties of a mother, that I could be free, and that I could, live the life that I wanted to live, because my daughter was in the way of my drinking. And when I didn't have to be the responsible parent anymore, I could do what I wanted to do. And that was drink, and that was party, and that was, do anything I wanted to do. And very slowly at this point, alcohol is becoming my master, and I don't realize it. It's dictating where I live, where I work. Every job I had was centered around alcohol. Every place I live, like Manhattan, I moved there because the bar stayed open until 5 a.m. Every relationship I have is centered around alcohol. If the person I'm with isn't drinking the way I'm drinking, or giving me what I need to drink the way I want to drink, or if they dare call me out on my drinking and tell me I need to slow down or moderate, I'm just moving on to the next one. And there's always a next one, and there's always a next one. And but what happens is I'm crossing over another line, and I don't realize it. And where it's going, it goes from being this party to this job, this full-time job of I need it to go to work. I need it to have a conversation with somebody. I needed to wake up in the morning. And after a time, I cross over this line where it goes from being a job to being this nightmare that I can't wake up from. I go to this very dark place, and started to happen when my daughter was about 7 years old. And by this time, I've moved on to my second marriage. I'm in my second pregnancy, and what's different this time is that I can't stop drinking at this point, and I have no desire to whatsoever. I don't even care about what the world thinks of me. I just hide it better, because there's no way I'm letting go of my solution. There's no way I'm giving that up, not for this child, not for my husband, not for anyone else, because I don't care, because I need alcohol more than I need it, you know, even to look good at this point. And I drink the entire pregnancy. And as a direct result of that, my son is born 3 months premature, and he's 2 pounds. And I remember the first time I laid eyes on my little boy, and he's in the NICU, and he's in an incubator, and he's covered in tubes. And in that moment that I saw him, in that moment, I experienced all this love and connection, that love and connection that I had not been able to experience while I was pregnant, because of my drinking and because of my, just need to disconnect from this child. But, when I saw him in that condition, I knew I put him there. So I experienced this overwhelming sense of shame and guilt. I did this. He cannot breathe because of me. He can't be held because of me. And the only thing in this world I know that will remove that kind of shame is more and more alcohol. The only problem is alcohol is not producing the same effect anymore. I am not getting the same relief, or at least I'm not getting it as quickly, and I need more, and I need more, and I need more. And this much I know. Listen, I am not a sociopath. In fact, I have, I experience deep, deep shame, and I feel things very deeply. And, I believe what our book says, that we have these moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we can't live up to them, even though we would want it to. And because I know this, I wanted to be a good mother, and I wanted to be a good sister and daughter and wife, and I wanted to be a good person. And I just didn't have the power to do that, because the kind of mother that I am is I nod out and I drop my child on the floor. The kind of mother I am, I drive around with my 2 kids in the back while I'm intoxicated, or I bring my baby into a bad neighborhood in Philadelphia, and I throw a blanket over his head in the middle of summer to go get what I need to go get a drink and hop back in my car, putting his life at risk. That's the kind of mother I am. And I'm the kind of mother, when my son is 8 months old, I get arrested with him in the car with me. And, this is when I really started to enter this very, very dark place. I remember that night. I remember getting bailed out. My husband had to go pick up our baby at the police station, and I came home the next day, and he has everything packed up, and he's going to leave me, and he's going to take my child from me. I'm going to lose another kid here. And so what do I do in that moment is I start begging, and I start pleading, and I start making these promises to him. And in that moment, I meant every single one of those promises with every fiber of my being. I'm begging, please do not leave. Please do not take him from me. Do not abandon me. I'm begging you, please. Please. And I meant those promises up until the moment he asked me to do one thing. He said, I'll stay on one condition. You go to treatment today, and you get sober today. And I looked at that man, and I looked at my little boy, and I knew he was going to walk out that door. And I still said no. I said no. Because here's what my alcoholism tells me. It tells me I'll fix this tomorrow. I'll get him back tomorrow. I'll worry about this tomorrow. But right now I need a drink. And in that moment, I needed a drink more than I needed a roof over my head, more than I needed, my marriage, more than I needed my child, more than I needed to breathe. I needed alcohol. I needed alcohol. And I had a drink. I had my drink, and they left, and they never came back, ever. Ever. And the shame that covers me after that is just so oppressive. I can't breathe. I want to die, and I can't kill myself. And I just drink, and I drink, and I drink. And for so many years, coming in these rooms and seeing you happy, joyous, and free people who I absolutely hate. I'll tell you why I hated all of you. Because you had something that was never going to be available to a low-life piece of garbage like me. You had a freedom, you had a forgiveness, you had a redemption that was never going to be available to me, not after the things that I've done to my family, not after the things that I've done to my children. I was never going to be able to experience that, because what I believe deep down is that I chose this, that I chose alcohol over my parents, my family, my loved ones, every relationship that ever mattered, every job that ever mattered, that I chose alcohol over my children. And it wasn't until years later when a woman sat down with me and opened up the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and explained to me what it says in there as a solution, that for reasons yet obscure, most alcoholics have lost the power of choice when it comes to a drink. I had no idea. I didn't have the ability to choose my children. I had no idea. I had lost that ability to choose. And when I saw it in black and white, I started to get set free just a little bit, because I knew in that moment I wasn't a piece of garbage. I wasn't beyond saving, beyond redemption, beyond forgiveness. I knew that I was an alcoholic, and alcohol had that much power over me, and that I just needed a power that much bigger than alcohol. And I want to tell you that, losing custody of my kids was enough to get me to stop, but it wasn't. I want to tell you that losing every job, every relationship I ever had, every home that I ever had was enough to get me to stop, but it wasn't. I would love to sit here tonight and tell you that the 11 felonies that I got during my drinking career was enough to get me to stop, but it wasn't. I would love to tell you that ending up on life support a few times was enough to get me to stop, but none of that was enough to get me to stop. No external consequence, no human power was ever enough to get me to stop. And if you're on this call tonight and you're hearing this, all this insanity that happened in my life and your consequences don't match mine, that's fine. None of those things are what make me alcoholic. In fact, the only reason I even talk about them is because I want to illustrate the power that alcohol had over me, and just how powerless that I had become, that there was no threat great enough. You could tell me that I was going to go to prison. You could tell me that I was going to lose my kids. You could tell me that I was going to die. And you know what I would say? Just tell me when, please. It was never a threat or a promise great enough. No human power could relieve my alcoholism, and I didn't know that. So I spent years suffering alcoholic torture, and it just, the abnormal becomes the normal, and this becomes my life. This becomes my life until something happened to me on May 2nd of 2012 that I wasn't looking for, that I wasn't seeking, that I wasn't expecting. And what happened was I had been on this run, and it was the shortest run I'd ever experienced. Every other run I had before that was well over a year long. And by the end of it, I had nothing. I had no material possessions, maybe a backpack full of clothes, and I'm couch hopping. But, this was a short run. It had only been about, 2 months. And the outside didn't look that bad. I had a roof over my head. I had a car. I had money in my pocket, and I wanted to die. I absolutely wanted to die. And I remember that last night, like it was yesterday. I remember, crawling out of bed at like 3 or 4 in the morning and getting on the highway and driving on, to go get a drink. And for the first time in my entire life, I had this experience where I had this overwhelming and overpowering desire to turn my car around and go home, and stop lying to my family, and stop lying to my children, and stop hurting every single person in my life. And even with this overwhelming and overpowering desire to turn around and go home, I can't physically do it. I cannot turn that steering wheel around. And in that moment, I knew this thing had me. I have never experienced powerlessness like that before. And in that moment, I did something I hadn't done ever before. And I cried out to a power that I didn't really believe in, and I certainly didn't think cared about me. And all I screamed was, "Dear God, please just kill me or stop me." Screaming and pounding on the steering wheel and cursing and just crying out to this power. See, I've had a God in my life. I had a conception of God for a really long time. When I was a child, I had a conception that was impressed on me. My parents brought me up to believe in, their conception of God, and that God had never worked for me. What I believed was that God was, transactional, that God was supposed to do my will, and I was supposed to earn his favor and all this other stuff, and that I would be rewarded if I did good and I'd punished if I did bad. And I had rejected this idea of God, or only relied on God when I needed something, when my back was against the wall, and I would give God my wish list, like, here you go, like, do my will for me. And when God didn't perform my will for me, like get me out of jail or fix my relationship for me or give me what I want, I assumed this power had abandoned me and wanted nothing to do with me. But in that moment, when all I was doing with absolute sincerity from the depths of my soul was begging God to kill me or stop me, I'd reached this jumping off point that the book talks about, where I can't live with it and I can't live without it. And I believe in that moment, I absolutely surrendered. I absolutely surrendered to this power. And 12 hours later, I had handcuffs on again. I don't know how God shows up in your life, but God has no problem showing up in mine as law enforcement. It's very effective, and it's certainly a power greater than myself. And, but here's what happened. You would think I experienced this beautiful gift of desperation, and it was really powerful. I remember that moment the handcuffs are getting clicked on my wrists, and I am actually feeling this sense of relief, like, oh my God, thank God this is over. Like, thank God somebody intervened in stopping me. But within like 24 hours, when I'm looking around at the circumstances, and they're not the circumstances I wanted. What I wanted was like a nice cushy rehab. And instead I'm getting a holding cell and a concrete floor. I'm not getting the good meds. I'm getting like the, you know, the dry, it's like, it's just bad. It's really awful. And I realized, like, wait a second, this isn't the deal we made, God. I wanted something different. And so what I do in that moment is I scramble and I pick up the phone and I start calling all these human powers that I've been manipulating for years. And I try to get them to help me get out of this situation. And one by one, every single one of those human powers hung up on me. And thank God they did. And what I would love to tell you tonight is that, I had that gift of desperation and this happened and I got separated from alcohol for the last time and experienced a psychic change and everything got better. But that's not what happened at all. What happened is like, okay, at this point, I have 11 felonies, right? And in Pennsylvania, I had gotten locked up on a retail theft. It was like a summary charge, which is almost like a ticket. So it wasn't that big of a deal. So I'm thinking, oh, well, this will just be a little slap on the wrist and I'll dry out in jail for a little bit. And then I'll just start back up again and rebuild my life like I had tried to do so many times and failed. But God and the judge had other ideas because I stood in front of a judge who sentenced me to 1 to 3 years to a state correctional facility. And I was incarcerated for 18 months. And the only thing that happened during those 18 months is that I was physically separated from alcohol. I had no chemical solution anymore. And I certainly had no spiritual solution in my life. And I'll tell you what that looks like for someone like me. Someone who is completely driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity, self-seeking. I pick up the phone on a phone account that my mommy and daddy are paying for. And I call home and I tell them what they need to do for me. Or I write really long apology letters home about how sorry I am. But, maybe if you were better parents or siblings, I wouldn't be here. PS and commissary money. This is how I show up. And I don't know any better. And for 18 months, this is how I behave. And after I've served my time, I'm getting out. I still have all these ideas about how I'm going to run my life. And I get out, and within 48 hours, every single idea or plan I had for my life got ripped out from underneath me. And I am left with nothing, no job, no money, no phone, nothing. Nobody really wants to talk to me. And I am curled up in the fetal position on the floor of a recovery house bathroom, crying out to this power that I don't think cares about me. And actually, I don't even really believe in, crying out all over again because I'm sober and I want to die and I don't know what's wrong with me. If this is what sober feels like, I don't want any part of it. And I'm begging this, God, help me. What am I supposed to do now? I haven't had a drink, haven't put anything in my body in 18 months. Help me, because I can't live like this. And then all of a sudden, a power greater than myself in the form of a recovery house manager comes in and tells me to get off the floor and go to a meeting. And that's what I do. And I walked up the steps of my old home group, the Greater Northeast Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And something happened that had never happened before. In all the years I've been stumbling in and out of AA, drinking your coffee and dating your men. I walked in that room and I saw God for the first time in the eyes of a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. This God I've been seeking in all these other places, in a church, in a bottle, in money, in relationships, and all these human powers. This God was sitting right in front of me. This power was right there. Because what happened was God placed people in front of me. Listen, I've seen happy, joyous, and free people in AA for years, and I didn't believe you. I thought you were crazy. You were liars. I didn't know your story. You weren't as bad as me. There's no way you were like me, right? The people God put in my path were people I drank with, got loaded with, people who I knew for a fact. I had seen them living on the streets of Philadelphia, homeless, who were now in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, lit up, sober and free, walking around with that beautiful blue book, talking about God and the 12 steps and helping people. And I'm still not completely sold, right, that this is going to work for someone like me. But I'm out of ideas and I'm willing to do anything people tell me to do. And I ask a woman to sponsor me, and she takes me through the 12 steps as they're outlined in the big book. And I can't tell you that I have these white light experiences. In fact, it was really uncomfortable. I remember my first third step experience because I've actually gone through the book more than once because I don't know, I show up and my my ego gets in the way. That's what happens when I'm sober. But my first time through, my first third step experience where I'm making this decision, the decision to turn my will and my life over to this power. And honestly, it's the most important decision I've probably ever made in my entire life. And I miss the moment I'm making it because I'm so busy thinking about myself. I'm kneeling on the floor. There's other people around us. I'm holding this woman's hand. We're saying this third step prayer. I'm reading the words. I don't know what they mean. And in my head, all I'm thinking about is people are looking at me. That's all I can think about. But I will tell you what happened when I got up from that prayer. That woman put paper in front of me and told me to start writing. And that's where everything started to change for me, because it says it right there in our book. When you turn the page over from that third step prayer, it says, although this decision is a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things that have been blocking us, right? And that's what happened. She told me to write all the resentments down. And I was like, great. I came back with 27 pages of resentments because that's how I show up to Alcoholics Anonymous, you and what you did to me, right? That's all I can see. And as I sit there for hours upon hours in my fifth step, something starts to happen. Now, I can't tell you I walked away from that experience being able to look the eye and feeling look the world in the eye and feeling the nearness of my creator. Like those promises did come, just not immediately. My initial experience with my first inventory, my first fifth step was I felt worse. I felt worse because for the first time in my life, I saw in black and white the truth that I had been unable to see for all these years. But what did happen as I started to see things differently, I started to realize that all these, I wasn't the victim of life. Like I remember my mother got a page to herself, like she had done this. This was her fault. I don't know about any of you, but my mother made me an alcoholic. That's what I come into AA convinced of. Because when I'm a teenager and I experienced this trauma at the hands of these three men, my mother's response is, well, how could you be so stupid? How could you let that happen? Right? That's what happened. And what I realized when I finally get to that fourth column where I resolutely look for my mistakes when I'm having this conversation with my sponsor, I realize that not only have I been a monster to this woman, selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and I've done nothing but torture her for 20 plus years. What I realize is I've taken this one decision my mother made when I was basically a child, and I allowed it to blind me to every beautiful thing my mother ever did for me my entire life. Every single time she showed up in rehab or detox with fresh sets of clothes, every time she answered my phone calls or just invited me to dinner where nobody else wanted me. This is the truth that I could not see. I can't see the truth. I can't see you. I can't feel God through my resentment. And when that started to get removed and I started to see the truth, I started to get set free just little by little and piece by piece. Like that 6 and 7, when I first had that experience, I come in and the bar is so low coming in. I'm a liar. I'm a cheat. I'm a thief. I've never been faithful in a relationship. So coming in, I'm on my knees. God can have everything because I'm not clinging to anything. You fast forward to 11 years sober, I pick and choose, and that's just the truth. Oftentimes now in my sobriety, I'll hold on to a defective character until I'm suffering as a result of it. But coming in, like all of that stuff is causing me consequences, and I don't want it anymore. And I give everything to God, and I get on my knees and ask God to remove these things and go out into the world and attempt to sweep away the debris that had accumulated out of my efforts to live on self-will and run the show myself. I love how the big book doesn't even talk about alcohol in that part. It says, because listen, the evidence that I have is I don't need alcohol to cause harm. I cause just as much harm sober if I'm being driven by fear and being driven by self. And I go out into the world and I start making these amends and I start experiencing these promises that you guys are talking about, these extravagant promises, because I believe that they are. Because you're telling me I'm going to know a new freedom and a new happiness, that I won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I lived a life consumed with fear and regretting every single thing that I ever did. And by the time I got to step 12, something had happened to me and I experienced this true power, because what I see God has done is he took all these vile, disgusting things, these things that I thought I would never be redeemed for, never be forgiven for, and they have become completely transformed and been made my most useful tools here in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when a woman comes to me and she's sitting in front of me and we're going through this work and she tells me she drank during her pregnancy, she abandoned her children, she cheated on her husband, instead of looking at her in judgment, I look at her in absolute love and I can say, me too. I did that too. And that is power. That is connection. That is the thing I had been seeking my whole life. And I found it here. That was God. That was God working through me. And I start to have this experience, and I start to experience this life beyond my wildest dreams that you guys were talking about, except I didn't know what you meant. When I came in, I thought a life beyond my wildest dreams had everything to do with the outside, right? I thought it meant, $1 million in the bank account, or a super hot boyfriend with a six pack, or all this external stuff. Come to find out, it had nothing to do with the external stuff. Now, mind you, I'll casually mention the outside in my life today is pretty incredible. Listen, I'm an 11-time felon, and now I'm a paralegal in a corporate law firm. I went to homeless to homeowner. I have a mortgage today, which is insane to me. These things were changed as a result of being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you guys taught me how to do things like, open the bill and actually pay the money, or show up to a job and be accountable and be honest and live with integrity. Things started to fall into place. I came in a high school dropout, and now I have, I'm working on my second degree because you guys taught me how to walk through fear. But again, none of those things are what's promised to me here. And they're not the gifts that I'm talking about. And some of the gifts that I've received here in Alcoholics Anonymous don't look like gifts, but they are the things that I hold most dear to me. Like getting a phone call coming up on 4 years sober from my mother telling me that my oldest sister was dead, and intuitively knowing how to handle a situation that used to baffle me in that moment, knowing that I needed to show up and help my parents bury their daughter, and that I needed to show up and help my nieces and nephew bury their mother. And I get this beautiful gift. God puts me in the room with my parents when they see their daughter in the casket for the first time. And I get the gift and the honor of being able to comfort my mother in the worst moment of her life, when she's doubled over in pain, and I get to be there at her side and I get to hold her. And not only that, the last year and a half of my sister's life, we were closer than we had ever been our entire lives, because of the 9th step, because of the amends, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, because of you guys, because of this program. And I get to carry that with me for the rest of my life. That is a gift. Because on my power, I'm in the bathroom getting loaded, I'm in a rehab, I'm in a jail, I'm anywhere but in that moment. I'm anywhere, I'm covered in shame, I'm hiding. But you guys give me these gifts of being able to be present in that moment. And I know when I was kind of running through the steps, it sounds like I skipped over, steps 10 and 11. And I'll tell you why, because when I was first going through my steps, I kind of did. It's not because I didn't have thorough sponsorship. I did. I had a sponsor who took me through all 12 steps. She showed me where the information was in the book. She gave me the mechanics of the 10th step. And what I thought the 10th step was, for quite some time, was I pick up the phone and I call another woman, and we complain about him, what he did, and I vent. And then I, shoot out maybe a nightly review, and that's it. And I did some prayers, like I did the prayers out of the big book. I would get up in the morning and do an on awakening, and I had a very basic prayer life because you guys had to teach me how to pray, right? And that worked until it didn't. It worked until it didn't. And I'll tell you what happened. Coming up on 8 years sober, I had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for a while, and I had gotten rather complacent, and I didn't have these 2 vital steps working in my life, because for me, these steps are so powerful. This is where I infuse this power of God into my daily life. This is how I'm able to watch for these things that are my ego and myself getting in the way and causing harm. And I wasn't doing these things. What I was really doing was I was 2-stepping at this point. I was admitting I was powerless over alcohol, and I was running around the rooms of AA with a superhero cape on, and I was, grabbing a bunch of newcomers, and I was actually using them to produce an effect, because listen, there is an effect that I get when I sit with a newcomer. It's a powerful one. And it feels really good to have purpose in my life. And that felt good until it didn't. You know what happened? COVID hit. COVID hit, and all of a sudden the world shut down. And I'm coming up on 8 years sober, and I've been two-stepping for a while, and I had this real like basic prayer life, and I don't have much of an inventory life going. And I didn't realize how sick I had become and how disconnected and blocked off I had become, until all of a sudden, all the human powers, all that I had come to rely on again, started to get stripped away from me, just like they did everybody else, right? I still had a job, but I couldn't leave my house. So I'm stuck inside all day. So I didn't have that human connection anymore. My relationship at the time was tanking horrendously. So that was being stripped away from me. All of this outside stuff. AA meetings were shut down, and we had Zoom, which is amazing, but it wasn't the same as that physical presence. And all of this was come crashing down on me. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there in my sober skin, suffering again, crying out all over again to this power, because there's something wrong with me. And I experienced this moment of grace, a moment of grace that not everybody got during COVID, because a lot of people I really love and really respected in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous didn't experience this, where I knew that if I didn't take some action or do something, I was going to walk out that door and I was probably going to have a drink. And instead, what I did is I picked up the phone and I called another woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I told her I was in trouble and I needed help. And that woman took me through all 12 steps from the very beginning, admitting this powerlessness and like dealing with my present current insanity and my current alcoholism. And, I'll tell you, there's something extremely humbling. It's coming in. I do this inventory, and I have this inventory, and I'm so broken, and I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't even care about being embarrassed about it, but there was something absolutely humbling about going through this inventory of sober behavior, sober resentment, sober character defects. And it was, I couldn't even believe how bad it had gotten. And my 8-step list was 26 people long, and they weren't little amends. They weren't kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, I snubbed you in a meeting. These were really big harms that I had caused other people. And so what I do is I'm broken again, and I'm sober, and I go out and I make these amends to people. And the freedom that I experienced on the other side of that was so indescribably wonderful. Having the humility to go through this work as if I knew absolutely nothing saved my life, and it lit the fire I have for Alcoholics Anonymous in a level that I had not yet experienced before. And what this did for me, I'm so grateful I had this experience, is that ever since that happened, I have not once let up on this program of action, especially when it comes to steps 10 and 11. Seeking this power on a greater level and continuing to watch for selfishness, resentment, dishonesty, and fear. And thank God I had that experience, because a little over a year ago, my little brother, who's one of us, we were on the phone and we're having this little back and forth. We were gossiping about my other brother and his marriage. Had nothing to do with us, but we didn't agree about what we were talking about. And, we went back and forth, and finally my little brother said to me, well, why don't you tell me how you really feel? And my ego showed right up. And here's what I say, well, okay. And I show up, and, that stage character of Miss Alcoholics Anonymous pops right into play. And, I show up in the kindest, most loving, condescending way imaginable. And what I say to my little brother is, well, I think you need to stop blaming mom and dad for your problems, and it's time for you to take accountability. And I say all these things to him, and my brother freaks out and he screams at me, and he says, I'll never speak to you again. And he hung up the phone and he blocked my number. And this is why I bring up the 10th step specifically. When I got off that phone call, my first thought, my first feeling is, well, I'm right, he's wrong, because he cursed me out. He screamed at me. He blocked my number. He got angry. I was calm. I was collected. I didn't curse. I was polite to him. But when I watched, and I'd gotten accustomed to watching for a while, I realized there was something deeper going on, and it didn't feel right. Something about the way that phone call ended didn't feel right. So I did what our book says to do. I prayed, asked God to remove it. I picked up the phone for that discussion. I called my sponsor, and I'm on the phone with my sponsor for an hour. And at the end of this conversation, we get to the truth. And the truth is this: I'm just afraid. I'm terrified that my little brother is going to die. And I say these things. I try to control him and I try to manipulate him and I try to manage him because I don't want my little brother to die. I'm just scared. Because honestly, in that moment, if I had been able to tell the truth, what I would have said was, I miss you and I love you and I just want you to be okay. But fear won't allow me to say those things, right? And so when I finished this conversation, at the end of the conversation, she says to me, well, you need to clean it up, because that's our third part of our 10th step, right? It says, we were wrong. We promptly admitted it, right? We amend what we need to quickly. And I tell my sponsor, well, he has me blocked. I can't do that. She said, text him for the next 3 days. And if he doesn't unblock you, write a letter. And I do exactly what she tells me to do. And he doesn't unblock me. And I call my brother's girlfriend and she gives me the address and I write him a note. And actually, I only gave myself a tiny little piece of paper because I knew if I gave myself a whole sheet of paper, what I would do, my ego would get in there and it would explain all the reasons that I was wrong. Instead, I wrote 3 sentences to my little brother. I said, dear Benjamin, I was wrong to speak to you that way. You didn't deserve it. I love you very much. And 2 months later, my brother died as a direct result of this disease. And on the morning of his death, I was on the phone with his girlfriend for 2 hours, and she told me that my brother got that note and he read that note. And she told me his reaction when he read it. It was his usual arrogance, and he made a joke. He said he was going to keep me blocked to make me sweat it out because that's just who he was. But here's the gift that I never would have experienced without Alcoholics Anonymous and without these steps, is when I heard that, I knew that up until my brother took his last breath, he knew that I loved him. And up until he took his last breath, I know that my brother loved me. Because what you guys give me, what Alcoholics Anonymous give me, you teach me that it's more important to love my brother than it is to be right. And I can't get there on my own. I won't have the power to do that. And I got to show up again, and I got to carry my baby brother's ashes to his funeral, and I got to stand up and give him a eulogy. I remember when I had made an amends to my mother, and when I was first going through the steps, and I asked her what I could do to make things right. And my mother told me, I need you to be a living example of recovery to your little brother. And 2 weeks after he died, I was on the phone with her, and I asked her, I said, Mom, do you remember what you asked me to do? And she said, I do. And I said, did I fail? And I didn't know that I was on speakerphone and that my father was in the car, but both of my parents at the exact same moment shouted out emphatically, no. And my father said, absolutely not. And he said, in fact, everybody was shocked that he didn't get this after witnessing your transformation. See, I experienced some anger at God for a little bit because I hear these steps, like I hear these promises, I hear like, God will provide what we need if we stay close to him and perform his work well. I think this is all about me. I take everything personally, and I think my life will bear witness to my brother that it's supposed to, but I don't get a say in who my life bears witness to. That just wasn't God's will. That wasn't God's will. But the beautiful thing is my life continues to bear witness in that I have lost 2 people I didn't know a life without. And not for 1 second did I think of running. Not for 1 second did I think of hiding from this. And I ran from everything. See, the life beyond my wildest dreams that you guys gave me was being a part of this thing called life and not running and not hiding from it. Everybody talks about we get sober and life shows up. That's not the truth. Life was already here. You guys give me the ability to be a part of life, to be present in life, the joy and the sorrow, all of it, and not run and hide. And it's not all sorrow. Like, I have amazing joy in my life. I have a relationship with my daughter that I never even dreamed possible. She is closer to me than any other human being on this planet, including her father, the man who raised her. And that's not because he's not a good man, and that's not because he's not a good father. In fact, he's an absolute dear friend of mine. I celebrate holidays at his house with his new wife, with their children from that marriage. I babysit his daughter from that marriage. We have this beautiful blended family. My daughter gets to experience all of this love because of Alcoholics Anonymous and because of the amends process. right? That's what I get. The reason my daughter is closer to me than to him or anyone else is because I come to AA, I have this experience, and you guys taught me how to be a mother. You guys taught me how to love her and show up for her. Just love her how she is, for who she is, and not try to fix her or manage her. Before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, all I could do was have babies. That's all I knew how to do. I didn't know how to be a mother, but you guys taught me that. I get to play these roles God assigns me. I get to be a daughter. I get to be a friend. I get to be a sister. I get to be a sponsor. I get to see women come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous completely broken. And I get to see their lives transform from the inside out. I get to bond with these women and connect with these women and love these women. And I actually care about other human beings. That is not me. My whole life up until coming into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and having this experience was all about me. Every relationship I had was transactional. If you didn't serve some purpose in my life, I moved on to the next human being. But I have genuine love and connection with other people today. That is the beauty of the life I get to live today. That is the beauty of the life we all get to live here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And listen, it will never be perfect, right? There will always be things that are like, missing from, we're not perfect in my life. Like I have a son I haven't seen in 18 years now. I lost custody of him when he was 6 years old. And, I made an attempt to reach out to his father and stepmother when I was first going through my steps, and they did not respond. I wrote them a letter as I was instructed to do. And I followed that up and I followed that up and I followed that up. My son is an adult now, and I've been reaching out for years and years and years. In fact, for many, many years, I've done nothing but send a card or a note with money and just sent it out into the world, asking nothing for myself every single month on the same day, every month for years and years. And I get nothing, right? And at a few years sober, I remember, starting to get into that place where, feeling entitled, like that farmer coming up out of the cellar, like, Annie Grant, the wind stopped blowing. I don't get it. I have like 4 years now. Like, why won't they talk to me? See, what I forgot was the level of harm that I caused. What I forgot was there was this little boy who I made suffer and caused so much chaos and confusion. In fact, there was this little boy who almost didn't survive having me as a mother. I forget that part. I think because I have a few 24 hours, everybody's supposed to like throw me a party and my son is supposed to fly back into my arms. So at a few years sober, I start questioning like, well, why isn't this happening? Why isn't this happening? And I start asking people, well, what do I do? And I honestly had well-meaning people in and out of the rooms of AA going, well, get a lawyer, do this. You never fully lost your rights. And then something happened. This still small voice, this quiet voice that is not me, instead of doing what I wanted to do, said, well, why don't you do something different? Why don't you do what the big book says? And the big book says, when we don't know what to do, we ask God for an intuitive thought or decision. And I start begging and I start pleading because at this point, I hadn't seen my son in a decade. I didn't even know what he looked like. And I start begging, please, God, just show me what to do here. I don't know what the right thing is. I miss my son. Please show me. And then one night I typed my son's name into Instagram, and there he was, beautiful, happy, and loved. And I had this peace come into my heart, and this knowing that the restoration of my relationship with my boy will happen on God's time, and it won't be on mine. And the deeper knowing and understanding I have now, the more work I do and the more seeking that I do, is that the restoration of this relationship may never look the way I want it to, but God will amend this or fix this in some way. I just can't see that. I can't see it. And that's power. That's God, because that's not me. Because coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm convinced that the outside has to look a certain way for me to be okay inside, that I have to have the marriage and the job, and that, nobody I love can die. And that I have to have my kids back in order for me to be okay. And that's simply not the truth. It says in our book in chapter 7 that we have to burn the idea into the consciousness of every person that we can get well regardless of anyone. All we have to do is trust God and clean house. And that is the truth. And when I am well from the inside out, I don't need a drink anymore. These 12 steps produce the same effect as alcohol. In fact, so much better because I'm aware and present of it. Like, I love the effect produced by the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not special and I'm not unique. This gift that I've experienced is available to every single person on this call tonight. All we have to do is work for it. I love you guys. Thank you so much for having me on tonight.